Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, it's day 2 of David Cameron's visit to Iceland. He's meant to be making friends and influencing people with our North European neighbours. Let's find out if he is. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg, is in Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. Laura, hi. Looks lovely where you are. What's going on there?
Hi, Andrew. Well, David Cameron's been trying to show in the last couple of days that he is, after trying to stay out of the fray, now really engaging in this whole debate. That is a change of position, no doubt about it, because in recent months, while the campaign for out and in have been getting busy, Number 10 had really wanted to hang back. But this week, that's changed. He's trying to show progress. He's been warning about the idea of having a looser relationship like Iceland and Norway do with the rest of the EU. But I think maybe more than anything else, Number 10's been trying to show that he is actually doing something. One of the criticisms that's been made at home is that there's not really anything going on with the renegotiation. It's all a bit of emperor's new clothes at the moment. Downing Street challenge that. They insist that things are happening. And in fact, the Europe Minister, David Lidington, said last night that the technical talks were actually complete. The difficulty with all that is when you talk to European leaders here, the Finnish Prime Minister and the Estonian one, as we've been doing in the last 24 hours, both of them said to me that they were yet to see any real detail and that there haven't been any concrete proposals put on the table. All of that matters, of course, not just because David Cameron wants to look like he's in the right place, but there's only a few weeks left before he said he'd actually put those proposals into the public domain. Tricky times.
Tricky times indeed, and a first for a British Prime Minister. I understand that there hasn't been a British Prime Minister in Reykjavik since Winston Churchill. I assume that was probably during the war. What's it like there? Tell us, what's Reykjavik like?
1941 was the year, and you're absolutely right. Churchill came here during the Second World War. Summits, as you well know, are often quite odd affairs. You know, you get a gang of political leaders, complete with their entourages, sweeping into capitals around the world. And this is, I have to say, in that rather strange tradition, partly because of where the summit's actually taking place. This is the Summit Hotel, and throughout the last couple of days there have been some rather sort of bemused glances and bemused exchanges between the tourists who are here for a spot of whale watching or a trip round Reykjavik's harbour in a boat, wrapped up warm in their puffer jackets, wandering around like Michelin men. And then on the other side, you've got the sort of entourages sweeping through, security men with earpieces in and leaders looking as if they're going busy about their business. I have to say, compared to a summit in Brussels or the kinds of things that happen in America or G20 or a big hardcore meeting like that, this is a pretty relaxed and friendly affair, a bit like the Icelanders themselves.
Indeed they are. Laura, thanks for that. Don't go whale watching. That seems to be a rather dangerous occupation these days, but try the hot springs. You'll enjoy them. They're wonderful. Laura Kunsberg there in Reykjavik. With us now, the Conservative peer, Martin Callanan, who used to be a member of the European Parliament, and the UKIP MP, Douglas Carswell. Welcome to you both. Martin Callanan, how can the Prime Minister say negotiations are going well when people like the leaders of Estonia and the Finns say they don't even know what he wants?
Well, I don't know what he wants either, so I think we've got it in broad terms, but we haven't seen the detail, and I think we all look forward to him publishing
Why don't we know what
next
he wants?
month. I think that's a good question.
And do you have a good answer?
I think that their view is that they want to try and conclude negotiations in secret and not set out the negotiating position too early. But of course, nobody knows what's actually on the table, and we're all going to look forward to seeing what it is they're actually asking for when they publish the letter to the European Council in November.
You want Britain to leave the European Union. Is this good news or bad news for you, the way the Prime Minister is going about it?
I'd say I think it's pretty good news. I think many undecided voters will realise that there's no fundamentally new deal on the table, and they're more inclined, therefore, to support leaving. But bear in mind, 2 years ago when David Cameron first announced the in-out referendum, he was framing this as a choice between leaving or a fundamentally new deal. I think this week marks the moment at which the Prime Minister starts to campaign for remaining in the EU on current terms. He's more or less given up on the idea of a New Deal. So he's using a combination of project fear, saying, oh, you're going to be like Norway, as if that's the worst thing in the world. And on the other hand, suggesting that, we wouldn't have cheap flights if we weren't in the EU. I mean, both are nonsensical positions, but I think this is a measure of, this is what the bottom of the barrel looks like in Downing Street if you've got no deal.
I mean, with the Prime Minister deciding to kind of come out against the, quote, Norwegian option, he is taking sides now. He said at one stage he'd rule nothing out. He's now ruled out the Norwegian option. Why would you do that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not aware of anybody that's actually arguing for the Norwegian option. But,
No,
Norwegian
but
is the rich...
it's a shorthand
Norway is the richest country in Europe. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
It's a shorthand for a much more semi-detached relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the Norwegian
Europe.
option is by no means perfect. They have a lot of problems in the relationship. They have
It's nearly as bad as ours.
They have to accept a lot of the single market legislation, but they're not part of the common fisheries policy, common agricultural policy, common trade policy, there are parts of the common foreign policy, etc. So there are problems in the relationship, but it doesn't seem to do them any harm. And 70% of the population of Norway don't want to join as full members. So
would you be happy to have a British version? Because if we vote to come out, we won't copy Norway, but it could provide a kind of template for how to go. Would you be happy with a British version of the Norwegian relationship?
I think it would present one or two problems, particularly in terms of services. Our big export to the EU is services, financial services in particular, and we would need to have some fairly
Norway's
robust
covered by
safeguards.
services. Switzerland isn't, but Norway is.
Some pretty robust safeguards that
The Norway
operate
model's
the market.
a bad template, and let me explain why. Norway's in the position it's in because its political elites wanted Norway to join, and so as a prelude to membership, they sort of went into what you might call the waiting room for Brussels membership. The people in Norway had more sense than their politicians and said no, but they're left in this rather awkward position. Now, if Norway, with a population of 5-6 million, can get preferential terms to the ones we have, think of what we could do if we left the EU, the fourth largest economy in the world, and then negotiated for a genuine market access-based relationship, but without the red tape and the constraints that come with being in the EU.
What would be wrong with that?
I agree with Douglas in that respect, that if we did vote to leave, then I think we could probably negotiate ourselves a much better deal than Norway or indeed Switzerland have, because of our relative size.
The problem is,
but there are some problems with that as well.
The problem is we wouldn't really know until we did vote.
Yeah, that's the fundamental
risk,
difficulty. It depends what sort of goodwill is on the other side, how difficult they want to be, how awkward they want to be. Would, for instance, the big question is, would access to the single market necessarily result in accepting free movement, which is what many people's problem is with Europe?
Martin makes a really good point, but let's bear in mind, last year we bought about £50 billion more stuff off the European member states than they bought off us. So they're not going to put protectionist barriers against cross-channel trade from which they're the principal beneficiaries. It just doesn't make sense for them to do that. They're not going to do it.
Is the Prime Minister really no longer neutral on this? It's, all the signals we see is that he's going to do his utmost to keep Britain in the European Union.
I think that's always been clear. I don't think he's made much secret of the fact that fundamentally he wants to keep Britain in.
Doesn't that
and the renegotiation is about putting him in a position where he can
surely that may be the right position for a British Prime Minister to say. That's not for me to decide. But if you're in a negotiation, it's surely a mistake to send out signals to the other side that basically, even if you give us next to nothing, I'm for staying in.
To start off the negotiation by saying, well, please can I have all these concessions, but don't worry, we're going to stay in anyway, doesn't put you in a strong position. But of course, you're forgetting the trump card, which is the referendum. David Cameron doesn't get to decide. I don't get to decide. Douglas doesn't get to decide.
Well, you
it's
do.
Decided in
everyone else does too.
We have a vote now.
We all get to decide.
That was one.
Even members of the Lords, I think.
Do they get a vote?
Don't you
we
get
are.
a vote?
Of course we do.
It's in the It's actually in the referendum bill that gives us a vote this time, which is
very well.
If I may, the two biggest developments that have happened in the European Union over the past years is, one, the euro has proven to be a disastrous thing. It should never have happened.
Yeah.
Secondly, now this migration crisis is a huge problem. These two developments show that the European Union, one, the free movement of people, which I believe in, we might need to bring in with the free movement of people that passports are checked between borders, even if you are a European passport holder. You can still have free movement of people and check passports. But where the euro is concerned, that has proven once and for all that this euro project of an ever moving forward towards the United States of Europe is not going to happen.
It was the high
and I think if David Cameron can get an assurance that, because there are many in Europe right now who want to keep moving towards that United States of Europe, and that is something we would never be prepared to go down.
Given that, I agree with you, given that immigration is going to be such an important issue, I think it's worth bearing in mind that Iceland has a really good system of immigration. They have people who can go to Iceland with the skills that Iceland needs for Iceland to prosper. It works for the migrants. It works for Iceland. Why don't we do that here?
And also the other thing to keep in mind, the
It's
other
not
big,
exactly a huge queue.
but the
It's a
big
very
aspect
destination.
is also that
by
the
free movement.
perception of the outside world to countries like India, the United States, they all think for us to be part of the European Union is really important. The perception is very important. But on the other hand, I know that we're being hampered by being part of the European Union by not being able to do free trade deals. The EU-India free trade deal is just stuck up for years and years and years. We'll never get there.
You're
Whereas on our
absolutely
own,
right.
we'd get there within months.
You're absolutely right.
Well, that's not what the American trade representative said today or yesterday.
He said yesterday.
He said that America's moving to a free trade arrangements where it's doing deals with regional groups. It's just completed one in the Pacific. It hopes to do one in Europe as well, though it's way behind the Pacific one. They're not so keen anymore to do bilateral deals.
Well, the State Department and government officials tend to like the European Union. It's a project created by people like them to run human, economic and social affairs at their convenience. But I think His Lordship makes a really powerful point. We could have a free trade agreement with India. Isn't it absurd that Tata, which is a huge investor in this country, we don't have a free trade agreement with India? I mean, it's absurd. We could have these free trade agreements if we leave the European Union.
That's true, but there are different types of free trade agreements. Of course, it's easy nowadays to conclude a free trade agreement with third world countries, India, China, on manufactured goods. But what we want, of course, is services access, financial services, banking, insurance, etc. And that's much more difficult to get.
But whatever that US trade representative said, and he'll be here today, gone tomorrow, with the presidential election coming up, it is surely inconceivable that if the United Kingdom was outside the European Union, that it could not do a trade deal with the United States.
No, we'd do it instantly.
I was surprised by those
Absolutely.
comments.
What do you think?
I'd be interested to see what the politicians agree with
Iceland,
that.
with a population the size of Croydon, has a free trade agreement with China with a population of 1.4 billion. Now,
but only in manufactured goods, though, Douglas. That's the problem.
Where would you rather
No
be,
services.
Croydon or Reykjavik?
I prefer to be in Croydon, but Reykjavik is a great place. I've been there. It's a wonderful country.
He's very diplomatic.
agree.
Final point
But
to you.
on the other hand, if the ideal world would be if David Cameron would go in there and genuinely renegotiate for the whole of Europe, going back to what the European Union is genuinely meant to be about, if he could do that and get a more efficient Europe and not this European Parliament with this gravy train going every month to Strasbourg, with all the problems the EU has, if we
But
can
what
do
if
that,
that's not
that
on
would
offer?
also be a very good situation.
Will you
We could
support
end
the
on a
Leave
note of
campaign if that's not on
We
offer?
could end on a note of agreement on that. Yeah.
What, agreeing that the European Parliament isn't going to go
No,
I think we
that
can
as
agree
well,
on
but
that.
I was thinking in general comments more
from
about
either of its
Parliament.
places.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, thank you.